Hello everyone, I'm Sachin. I'm a fourth year PhD student at the University of Utah. And today I'll be talking about my paper, where the wild things are, brute force SSH attacks in the wild and how to stop them. So like many of you, SSH is an essential part of my daily workflow to access my lab machine, to access machine in the cloud, and to access machine in big test beds like CloudLab. And when it comes to brute force attacks, for those of you who have seen your SSH logs, you know what chaos and volume I'm talking about. But if you haven't, I think this talk is especially for you. So anyway, I was not able to ignore the growing volume of SSH attacks that were trying to break into my machine. So this work is a proof that I took it a little personally. So let's talk about SSH brute force attacks in the wild. So we collected SSH data on CloudLab for 4 years. And this plot on the x-axis shows the timeline, and on the y-axis shows the failed attempts in millions. So over the period of 4 years, we got 381 million failed brute force attempts. And as you can see in the beginning of our data collection, we got few 100,000 attempts every day. But in 2021, it seems like a normal practice to have 500,000 or 1 million attacks every day. Over the period of 4 years, we got a peak of 3.5 million a day. So you may be thinking that SSH brute force attacks are things of the past, but whatever we have observed, we can definitely say that SSH brute force attacks are still prevalent and in fact increasing. So let's talk more about our data collection. We collected our data at CloudLab, which is a public research facility used by various researchers across the globe. And we don't have any honeypot, and whatever data we collected are from actual machines which have legitimate users and attackers who are trying to break into these actual machines. So in previous studies, a lot of people have used honeypots, but the honeypot logs have certain limitations. For example, they exclusively have only attackers in them, and you cannot evaluate any blocking mechanism because they don't have legitimate users. So our unique data gave us the opportunity to analyze and compare various practices and patterns among legitimate users and attackers, and aided the development of the blocking mechanism. It also gave us the means to evaluate the effectiveness of our blocking mechanism. So let's talk about the ingredient of SSH brute force attack. So basically there are 3 ingredients. The first is the target machine, which are basically the node in CloudLab on which the attacker are trying to break in. So we have around 500 nodes in CloudLab, and one of the major questions that we try to answer here is how the attacker pick the target nodes. We did a lot of analysis, and I'm not going to go into that, but we found out that the attackers pick the target node randomly. The second component, the second ingredient is the host machine, which is basically the attacks are originating from. So we saw attacks from almost 800 unique IP addresses, 800,000 unique IP addresses. The third and the most important ingredient is the guessing vector, which is basically all the username password pair that the attacker used to break in. So we are a legitimate facility. We don't record any passwords. We only have usernames. And we recorded almost 270,000 unique usernames. So there's a lot of analysis about all these 3 ingredients in the paper. But for the purpose of this talk, I'll only talk about the guessing vector and especially the username aspect of it. So if I ask everyone in the room to pick a username to perform a brute force attack, most of us, for obvious reason, will pick root. So previously also, a lot of studies have found that majority of the SSH attacks use the username root, and this plot on the x-axis shows our timeline, on the y-axis shows the percentage of attacks that were using the username root. So as you can see in the beginning of our data collection, majority of the attacks were using the username root, but in most recent time, this percentage has drastically declined. So root percentage is declining in these attacks. These attacks are becoming more complex. Attackers are using diverse set of usernames, targeting various network devices, IoT devices, and softwares. So I want to point out here in the paper, we did a classification of these usernames, and please refer to the paper for more details on that. So as these attacks are becoming more complex, in terms of username, the 2 big questions are there patterns in the username utilized by these attackers? And can these patterns be fingerprinted for effective blocking? So let's find out. So let's assume a very small example in which there's an attacker or source IP using a guessing vector with a bunch of usernames, maybe unique or non-unique. What we do is we make a set of all these usernames and we call it a username set. Now let's move towards a more practical example in which there'll be multiple attackers or multiple source IP addresses and using different username sets. For example, the attacker 1 and attacker 4 uses username set A, attacker 2 uses username set B, and attacker 3 and attacker N uses the username set C. So in this particular case, as you can see that username set A is being used by attacker 1 and attacker 4. Similarly, username set C is also used by attacker 3 and attacker N. So what we do is, all these username sets which are used by more than one attacker or source IP, we call them as dictionaries. So what we found out in our data is at least 64% of the attackers use some sort of dictionary, and 94% of the attackers use at least one username that belongs to these dictionaries. So based on these numbers, we design our dictionary-based blocking. So basically, dictionary-based blocking is a blocking mechanism to defend against the generic SSH brute force attacks on the internet. And before I go into the numbers, I'll give you a spoiler here. It's very simple, but it's very, very effective. So what we do is we create a username blocking list by combining all these dictionaries, and we perform local sanitization to remove all the locally valid usernames, and any IP address that performs a fail attempt using a username that is in the username blocking list is subsequently blocked. So if you revisit these numbers, hypothetically, in our 4 years of data, we will block 94% of the attackers using this strategy. But the question is how dictionary-based blocking will perform in terms of percentage of attack blocked and in terms of number of false positives produced. And does the characteristic of dictionary-based blocking generalize, which basically means that is it something that we only experience at CloudLab, or is it applicable to other machines on the internet? So we evaluated dictionary-based blocking in simulation and in production. First, I'll talk about the simulation, and then we'll move to the production part. So we simulated dictionary-based blocking on 3 different sites, site A, B, and C, over 10 weeks of data. And overall, we blocked 99.3% of the attacks with 14 false positives per site. In this talk and in the paper also, we report the false positive in absolute numbers, because possibly every false positive will end up as a complaint ticket to the admins of these sites. So for evaluating the does the dictionary-based blocking generalize, what we did is we did a cross multiple site experiment, which is basically we generated username blocking list at one site and used it to block traffic at the other sites. So for example, we generated the username blocking list at site A, we used it to block traffic at site B and C, and we did the same with site B and site C. So overall, in this case, we blocked 99.4% of the attacks, and we produced 13 false positives per site. So dictionary-based blocking does generalize to other machines on the internet, and it offers high blocking rate and low false positive. So now let's stack up. What we did is we evaluated dictionary-based blocking and compared it to fail to ban. And fail to ban is another popular mechanism to defend against SSH brute force attacks. Fail to ban basically blocks an IP address that performs certain number of failed attempts in a certain period of time. So there can be various settings in which you can compare dictionary-based blocking and fail to ban. For the purpose of this talk, I'll only talk about the default setting, but in the paper, we do test them in various settings to make sure that whatever comparisons we are doing are fair. So we simulated both of them on our 3 sites. So this plot on the y-axis shows the percentage of attack blocked, and on the x-axis shows site, in this case site A. So you want to maximize the percentage of attacks blocks ideally. So dictionary-based blocking, which is the blue bar, blocks more than 99% of the attacks. Fail to ban blocks around 65. And for site B and site C, we saw similar trends. This was the percentage of attacks blocked. Let's talk about the number of false positives produced. So this plot on the y-axis shows absolute number of false positives, and the x-axis shows the site. And you want to minimize ideally the number of false positives. So dictionary-based blocking produced 18 false positives, but as you can see, fail to ban produced around 100. And for site B and site C, we saw similar trends. So based on these experiments, dictionary-based blocking outperforms fail-to-ban with huge margins in terms of percentage of attack blocked and in terms of number of false positives produced. So let's talk about dictionary-based blocking in production. But before we go to the numbers and the real deployment, we need to revisit our plot from the beginning. So it's already 2024. You must be thinking that why our data collection stopped in August of 21. So what happened, we deployed a firewall in August 21, and the firewall has few properties. Like this firewall subscribes to some standard IP block lists to defend CloudLab against other attackers that are trying to exploit various protocols and vulnerabilities. And the filter rules in this firewall are updated periodically and in absolute time every hour. So whatever data we got before August 21 was completely unfiltered, but after August 21, somewhat we get some filtered data at our nodes. And we deploy our dictionary-based blocking on this filtered data. So we deployed dictionary-based blocking for 3 weeks on more than 400 nodes in CloudLab. And due to real-time IP blocking and filtered traffic, calculating the exact attack block rate is challenging. So for the evaluation, what we did, we calculate the effectiveness by comparing attack volumes pre and post deployment of dictionary-based blocking. So this plot on the y-axis shows attacks in thousands, and on the x-axis shows before dictionary-based blocking was deployed. And then we deployed our blocking scheme, and the attack traffic getting through decreased drastically. So dictionary-based blocking blocks 4/5 of the attacks missed by other defense mechanisms. And during this whole period of deployment, no legitimate user contacted the admins regarding getting blocked, so which loosely means that we produce 0 false positive in this period of time. So all these numbers looks very strong, and it seems like dictionary-based blocking is performing very well, but you must be wondering that where the performance of dictionary-based blocking comes from. Does the performance comes from the high number of nodes and the high volume of data that we have access to in CloudLab? So the short answer to this is no. And if I try to elaborate and tell you the long answer, and the long answer is no, it doesn't. So, but the question remains that how many nodes you actually need on the internet to perform an effective blocking, or how many collectors you need. So what we did an experiment in which we varied the number of collector or collecting points, and we computed the username blocking list using these few collecting points, and then we used that list to block the traffic. So for example, we create a username blocking list with only one collector, and we use this list to block traffic at all the nodes in site B, and overall, at least we blocked minimum of 97.6% of the attacks. So why I'm saying we blocked minimum, because we did the same experiment multiple times, and every time we picked a random collector. And we increased the number of collectors. For 2 collectors, we blocked minimum of 98.4, and for 6 collectors, we blocked a minimum of 99%. So fewer collectors can also perform very effective blocking using dictionary-based blocking. And in conclusion, I just want to say that our analysis of the attackers and attack patterns aided the development of blocking mechanism. We developed dictionary-based blocking, which is easy to compute, very lightweight mechanism, and it outperforms the existing mechanism by significant margin. And there are way more insights in the paper, and I will please refer to the paper for more information. And in the end, before I end this talk, I want to say that if you use CloudLab and if you have been blocked in the recent time, now you know what happened and who is responsible. Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to have questions.